right. This is still Good Morning Nigeria on the network service of the NTA. And before we begin our conversation on democracy in West Africa, the Senegal example, let's take this background report by Joseph Osen.
The swearing-in of 40-year-old newly democratically elected president of Senegal, Bassirou Diomaye Faye, presents the country as the new face of democracy in the West African sub-region. The decision of the country's Constitutional Council for the election to be conducted before the presidential term ends on 2nd April against the wish of the then sitting president, Macky Sall, to extend the process beyond his tenure. The smooth and successful electoral process and transition of power are all grounds West Africa will pride itself with. The African sub-region and the Sahel has in recent years suffered several coups, raising concern about the future of democracy in the areas. 7 coups d'etats have occurred in these regions since 2020, 4 of which were successful, with the coup in Niger in July 2023 being the most recent, following those in Guinea, Burkina Faso, and Mali. In all 4 cases, the reasons given by the military junta to overthrow the democratically elected government were similar: economic stagnations and persistent insecurity. The coups were positively received by a large section of the public in all 4 countries. In Guinea, the junta justification was that the former President Alpha Conde planned to change the constitution to enable him run for a 3rd term in office. The military struck in Mali after 3 months of protests by citizens against irregularity in the parliamentary election, while simultaneously demanding security and provision of basic services. In Burkina Faso and Niger, the civilian regimes were accused of corruption, laxity, and nepotism. Foreign influence is also reported to have played a significant role, as the relationship with the former colonial power, France, is turning sour in the last decade. France is blamed on backing poor leadership and failing to contain insurgency, unleashing mayhem in the region and crippling socio-economic activities. Many are calling for new partnership with countries like China and Russia already making inroads into the African continent. A move to halt recurrent coups in West Africa prompted the Economic Community of West African States to impose sanctions on Burkina Faso, Guinea, Mali, and Niger. In response, the 4 announced a breakaway from the regional bloc to form a new group, Alliance of Sahel States, in September 2023. However, ECOWAS co-founder and former Nigerian military leader, General Yakubu Gowon, called for the bloc to lift all sanctions on the 4 countries, adding that member states stand to benefit more when together. Though ECOWAS at its summit in February 2024 lifted some of the sanctions to push for dialogue, there is still no doubt that democracy remains under threat in West Africa. The democratic transition in Senegal beams a light on the importance of strong institutions and the rule of law, a welcome development for the Economic Community of West African States in its bid to defend democracy in the region. Guests on Good Morning Nigeria will take a look at democracy in West Africa with a view on the success in Senegal.
Thank you, Joseph, for that background report. Actually, the real age of the new president in Senegal is 44 and not 40. Apology for the slip there. And joining us to discuss this issue in the studio, we have Ambassador Usman Sarki, former Nigerian Deputy Permanent Representative to United Nations. You're welcome, Ambassador, to Good Morning Nigeria.
Thank you.
All right.
Thank you.
You're
Good
welcome,
to see you.
sir.
Thank you. Good morning.
Also joining us in the studio is Paul Ejime, International Affairs Analyst. Paul, you're welcome.
Thank you for having me. Thank you very much.
Good to see you.
We have also been joined here in the studio by Kopep Dabugat, who is Comrade Dabugat is an analyst on African international affairs, especially on governance, democratization, peace, and security issues. He is also an expert on civil society engagement with intergovernmental organizations like ECOWAS, African Union, the UN agencies, and so on. He also wears several other caps. Mr. Dabugat, we welcome you to Good Morning Nigeria.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
All right. So let's kickstart our conversation this morning with the ambassador. Ambassador, at least Africa, West Africa in particular, are rejoicing because of this a breath of fresh air with the newly sworn in of the Senegal president, a young man. And, you know, in the past for seven years, we had like 7 coups in the West African sub-region. But with this current development, how would you describe it?
Thank you very much for having me on your program, and good morning, Nigeria. Now, the development in Senegal is a very positive, outcome, especially, to retrieve the image of democracy and the fortunes of democracy and people's enthusiasm in electing their leaders. Having said that, it's very important for us to differentiate between democracy as a norm, as a pattern of enthroning a government, and then with governance itself. Governance is a critical factor in determining the credibility, integrity, and sustainability of democracy itself. Where governance is failing, especially in terms of the capacity of leadership and accountability of those in power, it undermines the concept of democracy. It undermines people's belief in democracy and also destroys the faith that people have in the system of electing their leaders. And over time, people get wary of going to the polls over and over and over again, doing the same thing, but actually getting an outcome that does not meet their expectations. And I think that is what has happened in West Africa over the years. Like you said, 7 coups in the last 7 or 8 years, spanning mostly the countries of Sahel, but also threatening to happen in countries like Guinea-Bissau and recently in Sierra Leone and so forth. So it is very important for us to talk of leadership, good governance, rule of law, integrity, transparency, accountability, and things like that. And even the observance of human decency and human rights in order for us to now show up and build up democracy. So democracy is not something that subsists on its own. It's not a potted plant. It is something that you nurture and you make it to grow, and is acculturated within your system, within your philosophy, within your beliefs. How far and to what extent have we actually domesticated democracy is something that needs to be examined very critically in West Africa. The ECOWAS protocols in democracy and good governance actually postulates the need for accountability, rule of law, constitutional order, and also the participation of people in decision-making and in running of their government. How many countries in West Africa have afforded the people the opportunity to actually check their governments? Very few, in terms of telling the leaders what they should do for the people and not what they want to do to the people. So in Senegal, what we witnessed, and I think I'm happy that my brother, Dr. Ejime, is here. We were in Dakar to observe the elections, and I had the good fortune and privilege to observe also the 2019 election in that country. The popular enthusiasm in Senegal, the discipline of the population, the sense of mission, and also patriotism underpin the election exercise in that country. The outcome is popular participation by young people, by women especially, who are the majority of voters, according to officials. So, and also, one thing we discovered is the labeling of the playing field in Senegal in terms of people coming out to aspire to become leaders and to be elected based on established rules and regulations of the conduct of election. You have referred to the Constitutional Council, Constitutional Court, and they have what they call the Directorate of Elections, the Directorate General of Elections, and also other regulatory bodies. Rule of law is paramount in Senegal, and that is why the democracy in Senegal has survived for the last 60 years or so without interruption. Only 2 countries in West Africa did not experience coup d'etat, Senegal and Cape Verde. So we have to be very introspective about the fate of democracy in West Africa and the type of governance that we give to our people and our country.
The type of government that we give to our people in the country. You have read out a lot of issues in this, your opening remarks. Maybe we should go to, you want to ask?
Yeah,
okay.
I like the points. I like the points that the ambassador made.
He has raised
about,
a lot of issues, yes.
You know, sometimes the dichotomy between democracy as a system and then governance itself, because you could have democracy and the players don't play by the rules of democracy. Senegal, if we talk about Faye, apart from his age, which makes him very young, but it is all that happened around the elections, from the cancellation to jailing of opposition to resistance by the people, rallying the people around, which ultimately produced Faye himself. He may not have made it, he may have, he may not have made it, but for all those things that happened. But how do we make the most of democracy? Because it's not like we didn't have democracy in all of these places. Where it has been truncated, reasons were given. Some say, oh, undue interference. Some said, well, they are not seeing the dividends of democracy and all of that. So it's not just about democracy, but how do we make the most of the democratic governance that we, well, appear to prefer in parts of West Africa? Paul Ejime.
Thank you, Victor. And thank you, Ambassador, and my colleague. You know, the point was well made. You know, there is the difference because people tend to mix things up. But my thesis is that, you know, you can even remove the names and then remove all these nomenclature. Let the countries go for what works for them. Remember in those days, in the Greek Roman system, people were on the square and determined what, how they were governed. It wasn't perfect, but it worked for them. Even in Mali, even in Nigeria, there are, you know, things you have when there are issues. The elders gathered. In Mali, they have a toguna. You know, people, there's like a hut. In Sierra Leone, they call it Palava hut, and things like that. The point is, when there are issues, and there are bound to be issues, you know, they can be contestatious and whatever, but you now have a system of dealing with disputes, because that is what it is about: power, distribution of power, and then engagement, like you said, to deliver on what now many call dividends of democracy. And what are they? If somebody has food on his table in far away in all these villages in Nigeria, they wouldn't bother about whether you have a rock at, whether there's a rock called Asu or whatever. they will be, you know, comfortable. In fact, if you ask them to move, because they are okay, they will say, where do you want us to go? I remember in this country, when you people were transferred abroad in those days, it was an issue because the local currency was stronger. It was like a punishment, but the reverse is the case. Okay, back to democracy. I think the issue really is that the practitioners, and here I'm talking about political actors and the politicians, they are to blame. It is not what names. You can call it any name you want, but you know, it is what they decide, what they want to make of it. Senegal example is coming. What happened? Coming after Liberia, I mean, because people were already forgetting Liberia. Liberia showed another example out of, a star in the midst of George Weah, former footballer, maybe he's a sportsman. When we were talking about these coups, these military juntas that are ruling the 4 countries, they conducted an election where a sitting president lost to, because they keep moving, the 2 parties that have been enjoying power. He lost to President-elect Boakai, an old man who has been there, in the trenches.
He was his deputy, right?
Yes, so now, when he did that, he, just like our own President Jonathan here, he picked up the phone and called, even before the tallies were up, to call Boakai and say, to concede. Because that is what is part of the problem. And it happened in Senegal.
In Senegal.
All the 18, there were 19 of them, but about 18 of them called to call. They have not even finished tallying. And then the president, who had taken on the country on a roller coaster that caused all these problems since 2021 because of this tenure elongation or third term thing, now had to call and then felicitate with the young man who is 44, the youngest, and then and they have all had 5 presidents. He's the 5th in their history from 1960. It says a lot about the peaceful transfer that they've all had. And maybe what works for them is the fact that they have one religion, 95% or more belong to one religion. But because in other places, these issues, our politicians play up, they use these cards, religious and ethnic, cards. In Senegal, majority Wolof, their language, or many of them speak, understand, even if they don't speak. And then religion is also something that, but that is also, I've lived there, working for Pan-African News Agency. That is one country that observes the Christian holidays more than the Vatican. Yes, because it's the level of tolerance. They tolerate, you don't even know that you are in the, because I go to, people go to church, they worship, and then they do the Muslims, they do their own thing. There is no, of course they have Tuba, an Islamic state in its own. They are operating like Sharia, they have the dress code and all that. But of course there will be friction, but it works. So what my thesis, like I said, it's not so much about, and it is right, government and governance, they are different. And this nomenclature about democracy or autocracy is because people are looking for, scapegoat. Let the system run, let the institutions run, because, like the ambassador said, credit should go to the population, the civil society in Senegal for what happened. If not so, even the Constitutional Council that intervened, they knew that if they didn't do so, to make sure that the election happened before yesterday, that Macky Sall should leave, that the people were going to go on the streets. But in other places, like in Nigeria, people are afraid. I know there is so much ruthlessness when governments want to come against people when they want to protest. But at the same time, more than 20 people died between 2021 and February, when Macky Sall was on his this misadventure. Because here was a man that was one of those on the vanguard of not allowing President Abdoulaye Wade to go on a third term. Abdoulaye Wade had done 12 years, wanted to go ahead, they stopped him. For somebody who was in that party that did that, to now come, he has served as a prime minister, he has served as president or speaker of the House of the National Assembly, and then president for 12 years. And he now wanted to extend. And Senegalese said, no, you are not the only one. He brought, when he failed, he reluctantly said he wasn't going to run. He now came through the back door to bring a decree to defer the election. You know, the problem was that the candidate they had, Amadou Ba, who is the prime minister or former prime minister, was not as popular. The Ousmane Sonko, you know, the main opposition leader, because he is now in the background. It was because he couldn't run. They wanted to. The government wanted to stop him with all kinds of things, and then jailed him. And because he's been jailed, he couldn't run. That was how Bashiru Jamil Faye. Now he said, okay, let his supporters support him. And that was what happened. You see the two of them. We have to wait and see this godfatherism and all this, how it works.
All right.
But we will get to the details.
Okay.
So it's about not the name, but what the actors make of the system.
Not the name, but
Yes.
what the actors make of the system. That is about the people, the politicians themselves, and the political parties. It's not about democracy. We have argued this thing on Good Morning Nigeria several times, and people have said that each country, we need to domesticate the kind of democracy that we want for our country. But people have argued, just like you have said, that no matter the kind of governance or democracy, if the people still have the same mindset, we'll still go back, we'll still have the same result. So until we begin to change, and some people have said that, you see, the issue of improving the quality of life of the people should be the guiding principles of governance in any democracy or in any rulership at all. So in order for us to avoid this issue of coups and counter coups in Africa, what do you think, your own view, what do you think should be the guiding principle?
Thank you very much. And it's a pleasure to be here with Ambassador and Paul. I think first I will start from the basic premise of what democracy is. The simplest definition says democracy is a government of the people, by the people and for the people. So by that definition, I think any sensible person will want to anchor on democracy as a choice system for governance. So that said, I think in West Africa we've made that choice very clearly in the protocol on democracy and good governance by adopting certain constitutional convergence principles. And one of them is the fact that you have to come to power through free, fair, transparent elections. And then also constitutionalism and several other aspects. Now, for me, I think the reason why we're seeing all these coups, all these anti-democratic moves within our governance system across West Africa is the simple fact that we've not reached that point where democracy is able to guarantee development. I think it's supposed to be a vehicle that produces, the effect of development in the society. And I think the story of democracy in West Africa has to do with several things. First is the extent to which the people have a say in their governance. And I think using the case of Senegal, the emergence of President Diomaye Faye, it shows that the will of the people has counted, and for me that's very important. Secondly, you can also see the narrative of the campaign narrative of this president, and also linking it up with the campaign narrative of Ousmane Sonko, who is de facto leader of opposition in Senegal. They have certain things that they've raised which are very, very key, and that is, I think, what brought them together. One is the need for accountability, transparency in the process of government contracts. Two is the need for integrity of leaders. three, and very important for us as West Africa, is the need to strengthen West Africa as a value system for regional integration for us. And I think on that note, I would say the people of Senegal have listened, to the plight, not just of the Senegalese people, but of the entire West Africa, So it establishes a benchmark that other West African countries can follow. The second is, we can also talk about the quality of governance that comes out within the system, or the results of the governance system. And there I can draw an analogy on the way that our systems entirely, not just for West Africa, but the whole of Africa, has this, subtle dichotomy between a traditional society and a modern society, where we have the so-called political governance system superimposed over a traditional system that was continued from pre-colonial times. And they are not really integrated. That in itself produces its own kind of effect on democracy, which challenges the loyalties of people towards entrenching democracy, towards developing that seamless culture of democratic orientation within the society. That is why we keep on seeing, our governments coming up with policies that that sort of gag, the population itself, that prevents media freedoms, prevents citizens' aspirations to count, that produces, in fact, most of the times, I wouldn't say in all cases, but most of the times, the worst people, or those alleged to be, corrupt in the system, as being the leaders.
Okay.
So the third principle that indicates for us where we are on our democracy in West Africa has to do with the level to which ECOWAS as an institution, and even our countries, have been able to entrench a culture, a system of, democratic awareness among the people. I think from pre-colonial times, and Paul has harped on that very well, from pre-colonial times, you see that most of our traditional systems had democratic, orientations in them. So democracy is not a totally new idea for our societies. However, we've not been able to synthesize a lot of these democratic values, traditional democratic values, into the value systems, into the governance systems that we have in place. I would want to see tomorrow an ECOWAS where it adopts or it reviews its protocol on democracy and good governance, and highlight some of these traditional democratic principles, that we've had, all the time. Yes, the current principles are there, and they sort of allude to some of this. But, being able to operationalize it in terms of our, our cultures, that is what we mean when we say every country, every system, or even the entire region needs to have a conversation about what democracy means.
What democracy means. Okay, yes. Thank you very much, Kopel, for that.
Let me get back to the Ambassador Serki. Now, Senegal appears to have passed the test, the litmus test. We are all aware of the circumstances that threw up Diomaye Faye as president, young man. But it is now time for governance. What are the hurdles that you see ahead of him. Of course, sentiments, the actions of Macky Sall and all of those helped to throw him up. Do you consider him prepared for the job, the task ahead?
Yes, thank you. The task ahead is enormous in terms of meeting the immediate challenges in Senegal. These are, one, youth unemployment, very critical. The downslide in the economy of Senegal, particularly in two critical areas of fishing and agriculture. He has to now sit up to really look at the structure of the economy, the negotiations for oil deals, concessions of land, and also fishing rights that have been conceded or given to foreign fishing companies to come. Senegalese water is overfished today, and a lot of Senegalese are going very far into the Atlantic, right up to the borders of Spain, in order to catch very mega, catch of fish and come back. And that has really driven and heightened the sense of alienation of young people in Senegal, whereby you find them taking perilous and hazardous journey across the ocean to Europe. And in the process, a lot of them are drowning and dying. So the president needs to sit down now to create an economic council to look at the negotiation for the oil concessions. By next year, they will start producing oil. What will they do with that oil revenue is very critical. Let's not forget that Macky Sall has done a lot of good for Senegal in terms of modernizing the country, infrastructure, airports, railway lines, tram lines, highways, universities, a lot of things. The only place where he has been found wanting is this extension of the elections, and we should not judge him solely by that. He has left big footprint in Senegal in terms of raising and elevating the profile of Senegal internationally and developing the country. He has established economic zones, he has created a new airport, the Blaise Diagne Airport, lots of things he has done. So I will urge President Faye to build on that, and at the same time to mobilize the youth in Senegal. They're very well educated, and they can do a lot of work in terms of rejuvenating the economy, moving the country forward, and also carrying along the neighboring countries like Guinea-Bissau, Gambia, Mali, and others in terms of creating a sphere, a zone of prosperity in the extreme western region of Africa. Now, the important thing is how he sets up his cabinet. Will they really consist mainly of intellectuals, academics, technocrats, politicians, or he will just blend everything together? What will be the role of women? Because they are the preponderant, personalities in elections in Senegal. What role will they play? What role will civil society play? And Senegalese in diaspora are very active, very strong in terms of elections. In 2019, 350,000 of them or so were registered to vote. This year, I think the number may be even higher. So they have to now be brought in, and they play a critical role in remittances. Construction in Senegal is done to a large extent by Senegalese in diaspora, so they need to do a lot of things. Okay. Now, having said so, I think I would like to just refer to what my brother spoke about, the tradition of democracy in West Africa. Very recently, His Highness, His Majesty, the Olubadan passed away, Balogun passed away. And within hours, without any rancor, any difficulty, any challenges, a new Olubadan was elected.
Yeah.
So the succession issue in West Africa is very critical. It's not something new to us. When an emir or oba or chief or eze or anyone in position of traditional leadership dies, there is a structure and system and philosophy of succession. But in our democratic, so-called modern democratic section, it is very chaotic. It is confusing, and there is a lot of arbitrariness in it. How many people can say, truthfully and honestly, that the people in Nigeria are responsible for selecting those who come into offices. Really, truly. In what way are people really participating in electing their representatives to come into offices in Africa today?
Actually, that's
It's a predetermined thing,
It
really.
is.
Those who come into offices, so-called through so-called elections, are predetermined by forces that are totally detached from the people. They are interest representatives, not representatives of the people, and I think we have to look at that.
Yeah, so, but with the development in Senegal,
Yeah.
you know, you highlighted, you know, what played out in Senegal.
Yes.
That is the enthusiasm of the people.
Yes, yeah.
You also said that the women came out en masse,
en masse,
for
yeah.
the election, and there was a level playing ground
Yeah.
for all the political parties, for
Yeah.
all the participants that participated
Yeah.
in the election. With this positive development in Senegal, how do you think it will foster democracy? Do you think this will further improve the democratic governance in this sub-region?
Yes. I think, example, peer review, peer example is very critical, very important. And the APRM, the Africa Peer Review Mechanism, is actually set up for us to learn from each other. So I do hope the election of the former president of Liberia, where he was a young man who came into office, and then he considered graciously and left. And the election of Faye should really give us example of how election should be a sportsman-like issue, where gentility, calmness, kindness, culture, and a sense of decency will come into politics and elections. It's not going to, it shouldn't be a winner-takes-all issue. And on this, I would like to please tell Nigerians that they should look into their history in order to discover that we have a rich tradition of good governance, rule of law, and human rights, and observance of democracy. They should look at the writings of our ancestors. And where there were no system of writing, they should look at the practices of our ancestors in the predominant empires, kingdoms, and chiefdoms in West Africa. For instance, Al-Magili wrote the obligations of princes for the emirs of Kano. Up till today, the emirs of Kano are abiding by that treatise on governance. Sheikh Usman Danfodio and his son Sultan Bello and his brother Abdullahi, they wrote copiously and extensively on human rights, on governance, on rule of law, on the responsibilities and accountability of leaders. Ahmad ibn Baba in Mali, in Timbuktu, he wrote extensively about governance, about rule of law, about constitution. Sheikh Ibrahim or Muhammad al-Barnawi, who wrote Shurb al-Zulal, he wrote on civil society hundreds of years ago, on what civil society means and what it should do, and how to hold governments accountable. And he criticized leaders for not adhering to their code of conduct in terms of respecting the opinion of people. So whatever Westerners tell us, it is not new. Our ancestors knew about it hundreds of years ago, even before we had first contact with white people. So it's very important for us to teach our people about the heritage, the Oyo in Oyo Empire. It's something that is a classical, even predating what we know of the Greek system or the Roman system. This is a self-sustaining system of checks and balances. If you go to the Benin Kingdom, if you go to Oyo, Ife, when Oba of Ife, the Oni of Ife, Sijuade Olugusi, passed away, were there any problems in selecting a successor? No. There is an atomicity to what was happening. When His Highness, the Emir of Zaria, Idris, passed away, within a matter of days, Ambassador Bamali emerged as the new Emir of Zaria, of Zozo, and he's still there. So let us look introspectively into our traditional system of governance and perfect the modern democracy that we're doing against our traditional inherited cultures.
Okay. Yes.
Lastly, Sam, sorry, the greatest problem threat to democracy in Nigeria and West Africa is impunity. Impunity and the lack of respect for due process and rule of law. We have to now address those issues seriously.
Okay, thank you very much, Ambassador. Paul, I mean, you have heard some of the issues raised by the Ambassador, especially the culture of impunity that is really, disturbing the democracy that we have in Africa, or especially in this side of the world. The question is, because he has raised the issue of we should learn or we should take a cue from the traditional setting of transition of governance in Africa. How applicable is that in this modern day democracy? Because you said earlier that it is not actually the democracy that is the problem, but the people that are practicing democracy. And he raised the issue of checks and balances, which we know that it's not even, it's not, we don't find it any longer. Because, the House of Representatives is supposed to be representing the people to check the excesses of the executive, which, does not exist. So what exactly, how do you think this problem can be tackled?
It is complex and multifaceted, but at the same time, it is also, you can resolve it. And it is not by slogans or campaigns. Because like you said, the young man in Senegal, he will now come to the brass task of governance. The jury will be out on that. But here, he mentioned impunity. That is just one of them. The other one is greed of these actors.
Yes.
And then selfishness, corruption, and they have added ruthlessness and wickedness to it. Because I cannot imagine in a place where you have given resources to manage for people. Even some politicians, they are given awarded contract to tar roads to their villages. They will not tar the thing, and then they think they are making money. Corruption is everywhere. But do you know the difference between many of those corruptions? In Europe, they go, like in my place, when you get to the farm and you find the barn where the yams are there, you can take one or two and then go and if you're hungry or whatever, but you are not greedy. So that the owner may not even notice that something is missing. That's Europe. In Asia, they will take that whatever it is that in the name of corruption or ill-gotten, but they use it to set up factories to employ people. So that while some people are praying for you, others are praying against you. So it's a case of reconciliation. I think that is what happens. God will judge us from the good we have done and the other side. So the money they steal is there.
They plunge it back into the system.
But in Africa, unfortunately, what we do is that we do not even take a few tubers. We get a trailer to come and remove the entire barn. And that way, because look at what the billions that people are talking. In those days, you talked about an accountant general that took 109 or more billion. I mean, because you talk about this, these are money that can transform a whole village that somebody decided to put, where we also have ministers in those days. If we thought that under President Buhari's period that it was, bad, even now, some ministers are taking money putting into private accounts. Some are saying that it was by mistake. Private accounts is taking government. And at times you talk about youths. If care is not taken, the youths are going to be worse than those who they are blaming today. Because some of them did not see Nigeria that worked. Some of them do not know that there was a Nigeria where if you are graduating from school, organizations are already going there to recruit you. that you had a car loan waiting for you. What is it? Volkswagen, what do they call
Pojo.
it? Or Pojo. For 5,000 naira or less. And there is accommodation. These youths are not, they don't know about it. So for them, what they have seen is daddy coming home with maybe a trunk load of cash, money. Ghana must go. And then, so when you keep it in your bedroom, the boy or girl will go and be picking from there and then using it to influence, to, terrorize his colleagues in school or other places. So it is systemic. It has gotten to the point where you now have to, this change of mindset should begin from home. It is not, because everybody has, there is a collapse of the family system. The Boko Haram, all these people, criminals, are they not from families? Their parents are probably not there to take care of them. So the children cannot know, they don't tell what is right from what is wrong. So I'm bringing this to this level because it is that now impacts society and then will now inform.
But in the past, sorry to cut in
yes.
the past, in communities like that, when you see somebody bringing in things, the other community members will question, where did you get this thing from? You were poor yesterday. How come all of a sudden you just transformed, like that, and you become, a rich man? There will be question raised. So how do we begin to encourage citizen participation in checks and balances in governance?
Okay. So that is
like we had in the past.
Yes, it's possible. What has happened is the value system is no longer there.
Okay.
We were told that a good name is better than riches. Is that not what we were taught?
Yeah.
Now, if you steal that money, they are giving you, both in church and in the mosque, you have to sit in front so that you are seen and all that. So it has collapsed. That dysfunctionality has impacted, society and then the kind of governance that we have. And a lot of things are now being, taken for granted. So we need to go back to the drawing board. I looked at when there's a Minister of Information. There used to be a national orientation.
Yes.
I mean, you ask, well, maybe they will complain that they don't have money, but there is need for us to begin to go back to those areas so that we can marry those traditional practices with the modern. I know, and what is it? Society is dynamic. We have seen strategic shifts. And the ecosystem is no longer the same. That is why for democracy, remember that ECOWAS was very effective when we didn't have terrorism. We didn't have this idea that some groups, you call them bandits, will come to the school and, shepherd about 200 or 300 children out of the school. Nobody saw them. And then people are negotiating with billions. And then we think everything is okay. Let Nigerians wake up. Senegalese didn't sleep when Macky Sall. If they had allowed Macky Sall, he will get away with what he has done. Let people hold the people, whether they elected them or the people who selected themselves, let them hold them accountable. Power belongs to the people. They can take it back and then throw these people. One will be wondering what will be going through the mind of Macky Sall when he was handing over to people he has tried to jail. Because that is the most humiliating. Whether politicians learn or forget nothing is another matter.
All right. Thank you very much, Paul Ejime, for your comments. Kopep, we are discussing democracy in West Africa, the Senegal example. Senegal has gone through all sorts, the good, the bad, the ugly, within such a short time. And I'm just wondering, what lessons are there for other countries in the sub-region to learn? To learn from Macky Sall, to learn from the people of Senegal, to learn from Diomaye Faye, a young man of 44.
More importantly, I will start from that. More importantly, there are lessons to learn from the Senegalese society itself. I think over the years, the Senegalese society has been able to build that sense of political consensus about, democracy being something that is there to stay. And that is why right from 1960, they've had this stable democracy up till now. And it will interest you to note that the dates of their handing over, to the new government has not changed for the past 30 years. So that is to show you that the culture has been established. The second thing about Senegalese society is the fact that the people are conscious and are ready to come out and fight for their rights and demand for their rights. I think when this process started 3 years ago, when the issue of the third term, began to come out and people began to protest, there were fears that Senegal was going to go down in a military coup over time at that different point in time. But that, for me, that has never crossed my mind, because right from 2012, I think I was to some extent involved in supporting the civil society process that brought Macky Sall into power. And it is funny to see that the same wind that brought him into power is the same wind that took him out. So there is that consistency in the Senegalese, society and system. And I think to some extent it has to do with their sense of, community, their sense of brotherhood and, and what they call teranga, the sense of carrying everybody along, of working with everybody and helping each other, So I think that has played a very good role. That said, I think the Senegalese leaders have also been sort of, products of that culture, but also they've, to a very large extent, tried to stick, to the needs of the people in the government, in the governance process, and that has been able to produce some level of, consistent development that, has been able to capture the interests of the people. Unlike other countries, where you find, leaders come into power and what they are known for is corruption, and that produces a lot of disenchantment within the society, and we see military coups here and there. For example, we've seen over the past, I would say 1 year, certain developments across the region. The adoption of laws that, that are not in the interest of the people. That, specifically close up the freedom of the flow of information. We've seen also leaders coming up at will to dissolve, parliament, for example, in Guinea-Bissau, against constitutional precepts, and nothing is done. That cannot happen in Senegal. That cannot happen in Senegal. We've also seen in the countries under military rule a lot of draconian laws affecting or targeting, opposition voices. Not really opposition parties, but opposition voices in the civil society, in the media, calling for political transition. For example, in Burkina Faso, we have this law of forced conscription, where the government can just decide to conscript you at any point in time. And they've used it against a lot of activists that have spoken, that have called for democratic transitions. And the next day, the person is missing and is at the war front fighting the terrorists. Then again, I think for Senegal, it doesn't have so much of this Islamist insurgents. Let's take Niger, Mali and Burkina Faso, which is a common, denominator among them. They don't have that, so they've not had to, as a society, confront something like that. Perhaps we may see a different experience, but for these other countries, these experiences have become a sort of excuse, to carry out certain, political adventurism. In all the three countries, there has been reference to the security threats as a reason for them, taking power. So I think what I'm trying to say is that the societies are diverse, even though the lessons of Senegal are timeless, there is a culture in place that, sustains democracy. In these other countries, and I think to a very large extent, including Nigeria, for Nigeria, it's a different kind of category. So, but we need, as a people in West Africa, to draw from these lessons of entrenching that culture.
We need to draw and entrench the culture.
Entrench that culture based on, traditional value systems.
Thank you very much, Kopek, for your view there. And you have talked about political consensus and also building consciousness amongst the people. We'll take a break now, but when we come back, we'll look at the foreign influence in African democracy. Stay with us. Thanks for staying with us. You're still on to Good Morning Nigeria on the network service of the NTA. So we still continue in our discussion talking about democracy in West Africa. Now, before we went on break, we raised the issue of foreign influence, in power that triggered so many coups in Africa. Lately, you have seen the influence, the incurring of maybe the Russia, the China trying to romance many of the African countries, that kind of a thing. So what do you think? Is there a role that this, UN can play to checkmate, the activities of these foreign powers in African democracy?
Yes, the United Nations is a consensus-based organization driven by member states, 193 of them in the last count. Each one of them sovereign, independent, and has the same say as the other. So therefore, for the United Nations to be effective in safeguarding the space for a country against interference by other countries, there must be a discussion on the correlation between power and the domestic sovereign state of a country. To do so, observance of international rule of law is very critical. And the United Nations Charter itself recognizes the non-use of force, non-aggression, and non-interference in the affairs of a country. So if these normative principles are really highlighted, emphasized, and observed, we will minimize drastically the situations and incidents of interference by other countries in others. But that is simply a wishful thinking, because interests override everything in the international arena. You have mentioned Russia, you have mentioned China. There is the United Nations, the big elephant in the room, the United States. There is France, there is UK,
yes.
There are other countries.
I mentioned that because they're just the new ones coming into Africa.
So all these countries, they have their interests, and they are looking for loopholes. They are looking for opportunities. In Kanuri language, we say it's only when the wall cracks that a lizard gets into it. A lizard cannot crack a wall. It's when there is a crack, the lizard goes in. What is that crack in our own case? Weak governments, weak institutions, leaders that are easily compromised, that they take money or privilege and they let go of their responsibility and dignity of their countries. In that way, foreigners will come in. Let me give you an example of how they interfere in our countries. The exploitation and extraction of resources. Two video clips went viral recently. One somewhere in the south of dozens of trailers carting away timber from a pristine forest to another country. Nobody knows who are behind that operation. And recently in Benue State, I was told, we saw dozens of trucks covered carrying some things, we don't know what they are, out of this country. Now, where is the capacity of the state, of the government, of the leaders to determine what comes into Nigeria and what goes out of Nigeria? Influence is not done mainly through occupation today. Foreign interference is done through the control of your productive forces, through the control of your economy, through influencing the direction of your economic policies, fiscal policies. We are talking about lack of US dollars today in Nigeria, but do we really lack US dollars in this country? We have things that are even more precious and more valuable than US dollars. But where are they? They are being carted out of this country by people who are supposedly above the state and above the law. And that is what happened in Niger in terms of the uranium, in Mali in terms of the gold, in other countries in terms of their natural resources. In the DRC, for the last 60 years, we could not get stability and peace in that country because of the extractive sector in that country. So anything that we do in Africa must be related to the situation of extraction of resources, wealth, and riches in our continent. And without controlling that, we will never aspire to get peace. And how do we control that? We have to now build up the capacity of the state, of government, of rule of law, of security, and transparency in government, in negotiation of contracts, in how we allow people outside to come into this country. After 60 years, if we are still complaining of foreign influence, then we have to ask ourselves, who are we, what are we, and what have we done over 60 years to allow ourselves to be in a situation where still foreigners will come and control us and interfere in our countries? Can you go and interfere in what China is doing today, in China or in India or in England or in America? You cannot. They will deal with you precisely according to their principles and laws. You cannot do that. But why do they come to Africa to do all these things that they want and get away with it?
Perhaps why does Africa allow them?
We are weak, we don't have institutions, and we are easily compromised. And I think we have to now look at how we organize our states, how we organize our society, how we organize our governance systems and structures, our decision-making policies, our implementation. The media has a very, very critical role to play. Civil society also. But above all, the rule of law must be observed and entrenched. And here, I would like to really point out what my brother, Mr. Ejime, started talking about, a culture of creating decency in our society in order to prevent these things. If you look at Chapter 2 of the Nigerian Constitution, if we will strictly apply Chapter 2 in terms of the directive principles of state and the responsibility and obligations of the state, we are going to remove a lot of obstacles that are happening in our country today. And if we take Chapter 4, which actually involves the privileges and rights of citizens, and government to guarantee those rights and privileges, we are going to now really smoothen the space and level the space for people's participation in government. Now, going beyond the Constitution, if you remember, in 1988, former President Ibrahim Babangida, General Babangida, established the Political Bureau, and it generated a discussion in Nigeria that led to the production of the Justice Kuki report, Dr. Kuki report.
Yeah.
That report is still there. If you look at it, the ethics and ethos of governance have been spelled out what to do. It led to the creation of the MAMSA.
Yeah.
It led to the creation of the National Orientation Agency. And it delineated responsibilities and obligations and duties for Nigerians, for government, for citizens, for media, for all the relevant institutions in the country. Why did we jettison that? And we just locked that report up. We are not applying it today. So Chapter 2 of the Nigerian Constitution, Chapter 4, and the recommendations of the Cookie Report and other processes and initiatives should be really diligently looked at so that we will now have effective governance in this country. This is our major problem. Effective and efficient government. We have been talking about the cost of governance. Can you do anything about it as a citizen? You cannot, because there are no systems available to you to redress this situation. Even your local government, you cannot check the system of, the cost of governance in your local government chairman can do anything, but you as a community, you cannot do anything. You have to come and bow and scribe for him or for her. At the state level, can you check your governor in terms of what they are doing? You cannot. And at the federal level, you are just reduced to an insignificant entity in terms of calling to order people that you have contributed to elect to come into office. Once elections are done, democracy now becomes something else. It becomes arbitrary, it becomes blind, and it becomes something that is inexorably moving towards isolating the citizens from their obligations, responsibilities, and privileges.
How do we get the citizens back, into democracy? That is participatory democracy now, because just like you said now, that the moment you elect your leaders, they are just there. You can't touch them again. You can't question them. You can't ask for books to be open. Unlike we have in other climes, it doesn't operate that way.
In Senegal, it's there.
Even in Senegal, just like
exactly.
you stated.
Senegal is there. We saw it in operation.
And because of that, they had to change the government.
Exactly.
You understand? So how do we this participatory democracy? The populace. It's so important here for us to be able to stop all these coup d'etats, because when you have coups, you see people coming to the streets and jubilating, celebrating, because it's like, oh, thank God, our freedom has come. That is the question now.
It's a manifestation of desperation. People despair with their so-called democratically elected leaders who want to either truncate the democratic process, change the constitution, extend their tenure, or refuse to give good governance to the people. And as such, people become exasperated. And when military coup takes place, they pour onto the streets blindly, jubilating that this bad lot have gone. These people are the saviors. And I think that mindset is a defeatist mindset, engendered by the entrenchment of impunity by the political class in their countries. And I think the only way to check against impunity is to entrench the system of recall of people you elect. That should be the first and fundamental pillar of our democracy. Once a local government area or a ward is dissatisfied with its representative, they should pass a vote of no confidence and recall that person, so that you know that when you are elected, you are on a hot seat. Any day you step out of line, and the people that they will recall you, and that should be the instrument, the weapon in the hands of the people. I do hope after this program I don't get picked up, for
you don't get recalled.
Let me get to Paul, because I've listened keenly, and I'm sure you have too, to what Ambassador Seriki has said, and I'm just wondering, is there a lot more that ECOWAS can do in the sub-region with regards to entrenchment of democracy?
Thank you. But before I go there, what ECOWAS can do, you need to have, you can't put a superstructure on a weak foundation. First and foremost, the nations have to, because the organization or association is as strong as its weakest member. So ECOWAS is not a policeman. It cannot enforce some of these things. There's a role for it. Those are the founding fathers they had an idea of what it was, that standing alone, you are weak, you are vulnerable, but coming together, 15 countries coming together,
become stronger.
Yes, you can negotiate from a position of strength, and then a lot of benefits accrue to it. Do you know that if an ECOWAS member, a country, is seeking position in any international organization or whatever, once they get the concurrence of ECOWAS, they take it to AU, the person is almost gone. And that has, will pass. That's what I'm saying. These are the benefits. And then you negotiate with partners to give ECOWAS support, both for election, for everything, because it's easier to deal with a functional regional organization. By the way, AU, or the former OAU, they had 8 of them. Maghreb, IGAD, ECOWAS, ECAS, and all of them. ECA. These are supposed to be the engine for development. Because AU cannot on its own with 54 members or more. It is easier for you to manage regionally. Okay. And now that is why you see that AU, when there are issues, they look up to the regional, they call them the regional economic communities. But some of them are not functioning. The one that was even functioning is ECOWAS, but has now found itself in this situation. And there is a history to that. That is why I will now go. But let me come to this issue of impunity. The things that have gone bad, they do so because there is no punishment for any bad behavior. Must be punished. There are no consequences. That is why people get away. And he has mentioned it. It is there in the law that you can recall, but how many they tried on that ninth or whatever, yes. 8th assembly, but it's impossible because these guys, they have weaponized.
Recall is rigorous.
Is that they made it that way so that these politicians, these are the actors that are the ones, organizing political and constitutional coups against their country. It's only when the military now takes up arms that they want to. But otherwise, they are already. So the recall is there, but it's not working. Those the elected or selected, they make it impossible. Africa is not poor, Nigeria is not poor, but has been impoverished by bad governance. These politicians are the ones, they weaponize poverty. That during election, once they give you 5,000 or whatever, you think, and then that is for 4 years. You won't see them again. And remember this saying that elections are who determines the outcome of elections. It's not the voters, but those who count the votes. And then you now see the position, the role that the judiciary is playing. When you will now come, I will stand an election with Victor. He will say, go to court, because he knows that when he goes there, he knows why he's saying so. That he has people in there he can call, and then they give him. So you buy judgment. Let's face it. Those are, and we were told that the judiciary is the last hope of the common man. Can we get it from this? What is happening? I'm coming to ECOWAS, but I'm not looking at the local, what you need locally before you can now get in ECOWAS. Then, when it comes to this governance, this issue that we are mentioning, you have to get it tied up together, and then get the countries to implement what they domesticate, and then comply with what they have signed up to. But they are not doing so. You talked about international influence. Let's go to the history of these 4 countries that you have coups. It's actually more than 12 coups in the last, from 2020. If you have not counted, if you count both failed and attempted,
the successful ones.
Within this period, but it didn't start today. It started a long time when some leader decided to go for tinker with the constitution to get a 3rd term. That was when it started. It started with Cote d'Ivoire, followed by Guinea, and so on and so forth. Then Then you brought in, with the death of the assassination of Muammar Gaddafi in 2011. Then the Sahel became an ungovernable space. And now the epicenter of these armed groups.
Yeah.
That is when the insecurity now took another issue. So it is either you are defeated by insecurity or by the fact that you now try to, for Alpha Conde, his own was the fact that that is what the military said, that he didn't fight, you try to get, third term. Do you know that this man organized an election during COVID and 3 officials of government died, including the chairman of the Electoral Commission, just to roll out, to make sure that they pass a referendum to organize an election during that period so that he will get power. Okay. But after that, he's been overthrown. So ECOWAS, yes, ECOWAS can come in. It was that allowing those erosion of the protocols, non-adherence, or applying them in breach. From when they started this, they were not checking on themselves, the political leaders. That was what, carrying out these electoral coups, political coups, constitutional coups, then that was what, you cannot justify military takeover. But when you do, if you make peaceful change impossible, you are cutting violent change. This is what has happened. And then there is the issue of France. And the fact that Nigeria ought to also stand up. Anything against ECOWAS is targeted against Nigeria. And Nigeria and France have been competing for influence since if Professor Adedeji, God bless his soul, one was lucky to meet him at Ijabuode, we call him Mr. ECOWAS. What he went through in trying to bring ECOWAS members together, there was resistance from France using some of his former colonies. That is still happening. The Macrons of this world are using some ECOWAS members to scuttle what ECOWAS is doing, and that is part of the. All right. That is what is causing the problem.
Okay, Paul. Thank you so much. I know you are so passionate about your thought, but because of time, let's just bring in Kopeb here, and if the next 5 years, let's look at what democracy will look like if things are done, correctly in Africa, in particular West Africa. What do you think democracy will look like in 5 years?
Well, thank you very much. And now I will put up my civil society cap so that I can raise issues here. I think that before even looking at the 5 years, we need to look at what needs to be done to ensure that in the next 5 years the state of democracy improves or changes positively. I think first and foremost, the ECOWAS needs to review its protocol on democracy and good governance.
Okay.
And I think this is a discussion that has been going on for over 10 years. There are several issues that are on the table for this review. One is the issue of tenure elongation. And as civil society, we have canvassed for this for over 15 years now. Second is the issue even of the ECOWAS Parliament. We have also canvassed for a situation whereby the ECOWAS parliamentarians would be elected directly by the citizens. So we want to see a situation whereby ECOWAS constituencies are mapped out and are created so that there will be separate ECOWAS elections.
Okay. All right. Unfortunately, we are completely out of time. I don't know if you could take 10 seconds.
Okay, 10 seconds. Yeah. So, yes, and lastly, maybe just to round up, let me bring the issue of, drawing on these traditional value systems,
5 seconds.
Where we can define, traditional principles of democracy in the ECOWAS protocol on democracy.
Okay, thank you very much. Kopep Dabugat, analyst on African international affairs, especially on governance, democratization, peace, and security issues, among other caps, including civil society cap, which you just have on now. Thank you very much for coming on Good Morning Nigeria.
Yes.
We also like to thank Paul Ejime, who is an analyst on international affairs. We thank you very much for your time and thoughts.
Thank you very much. There's no time. Otherwise, we would have offered what the roadblocks, things that they should avoid.
There will be more time.
Let me also thank Ambassador Usman Seriki for also coming on to the program. Thank you very much. We appreciate your time. We appreciate your thoughts. And we hope that democracy can grow stronger from here. And that's been Good Morning Nigeria on the network service of the NTA. We thank you for watching. I am Victor Azu. We'll see you again tomorrow.
And I am Ademola Adeoye. Thank you for joining us. See you tomorrow. Bye for now.